Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 798B, and today's date is October 22nd, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. Proxy Army is now moving from Iraq to Syria to fight Russia. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Well, today is a very dark day for the American people. We talked a lot, and we continue to talk a lot about CISA. And today, 83 senators just voted to expand surveillance. The faux cybersecurity bill, which is actually a surveillance bill in disguise. CISA has moved forward in the Senate via an overwhelming 83 to 14 vote. CISA is positioned as just a voluntary cybersecurity information sharing bill. It's really none of these things. I mean, it's what they're telling us is really the opposite. It's not voluntary, and it's not really about cybersecurity. It's a surveillance bill that effectively gives the NSA greater access to your information from companies in order to do deeper snooping through its upstream collection points. Even the attempts to supposedly clarify the language to protect data from being used for surveillance shows that the language is deliberately written to look like it does one thing while really opening up the ability of the NSA and the FBI to get much more information from you. Well, we see this with many of the bills. Whatever the government puts out, and they tell you this is a benefit for you because it's the Patriot Act, it's the USA Freedom Act, it's the Affordable Care Act. It's always the opposite. And here we are once again. It's the opposite of what they're trying to tell you. This is bad news for everyone. A lot of the bigger corporations like Apple, Twitter, Facebook, Google have spoken out against the bill in recent days, but no one's listening. So remember all those things we talked about where the government is going to continually spy on you, and it's going to use other methods to do so, where they're going to use corporations because they're already receiving all your information. So they ended the Patriot Act. They created the USA Freedom Act, which then plugs into CISA, which then allows companies to hand over all your information without being liable. Actually, this is much more efficient than what the NSA was doing before. And believe me, they're still doing what they were doing. They just wanted more information. And for those areas where they didn't have back doors, guess what? They don't need them. They're just going to get all your information now, and they'll be able to track you because all these companies, Google, Apple, Yahoo, all the places you shop at like Amazon, they're all tracking you. They have all your information. They know what you purchase. All this information now can be correlated easily in one huge database. So they didn't make anything better. They didn't stop the spying. They did the opposite. And this is a very dark day for everybody. Now, there is a French researcher who has proven that hackers can now control a smartphone from a distance of 16 feet through Siri or Google Voice on Apple or Android devices. If a user has headphones with a microphone plugged in, the hacker can use electromagnetic waves to act as your voice and command your phone to email phishing scams, access malware, make pricey phone calls, and more. And this is all from 16 feet away. I mean, this right here is dangerous. And everyone needs to protect themselves. And there's a good way of doing this. I mean, you should go out, get something that shields your phone, your credit cards, your licenses, And you can do this with blockitpocket.com. They have these sleeves that are interwoven with copper, silver, and other metals, which completely blocks the signal. And it will protect your credit cards with the RFID chips, your driver's license that will have the RFID chips, your phone, your iPad, because it will block the signal. And we all need to take responsibility for making sure that our things are secure. When you leave the house, you lock your house. When you get out of your car, you lock your buttons. It should be the same for your electronic devices. You should have passwords, difficult ones, so people can't guess it. At least make it longer than 4 digits. Try to use capitals, numbers, question marks. The more you use, the harder it is for people to get into your phone. You should use different things to block the signal. If you're on your computer doing searches or on your phone, use different search engines. Use Start Page. It will hide your searches. You can even use proxy servers on it. It will show that you're coming from a different location. So there's many different ways to hide and try to keep private. Now, are they all perfect? No. No, they're not. I mean, we would have to lock down the government, take over everything that they're doing to really make it private for us. But we can make it harder. We can make it more difficult. And we can show them that, you know what? We're standing up for our rights. You don't have the right to spy on me, and I will make it very, very difficult. Now, DHS, they are testing a border biometric program. And of course, this is going to hunt down terrorists. And their system that they're going to launch, it's a pilot program called Identity Intelligence Biometrics, I2B, which is intended to apply an automated face and fingerprint biometric identification system to help identify known and suspected terrorists. You know, those people that are special interest. Now, you know what's going to happen. This is a pilot program where they're testing it, and then it's going to be used all over the border, and everyone's going to be scanned. We know what's happening here, because as we know, they're creating this huge database, and all the states are going to eventually require your iris scan, your fingerprint, your facial scan, and that's all going to be sent up to the database, which will be then shared to Mexico and Canada. So what they're telling us right now is in the pilot phase. Eventually, it's going to be open to every single person, and everyone's information will then be in this database, even if you haven't committed anything or if you're just coming in and out of the country, which again is another violation of our rights. Now, the European Union, they are warning their citizens that Facebook is dangerous. And they're saying that you might be spied on by the United States. And the warning came out, and they're saying close your Facebook accounts, because if you want your personal information kept private from prying eyes, you need to close it, because the current safe harbor legislation does not protect your privacy or data from the U.S. intelligence agency, because they're operating outside of the EU. Now, on the other hand, Australia, they're going to use photos from social media websites like Facebook in their counterterrorism database. So they're going to be collecting all the photos in Facebook and bringing it into a database. And of course, critics are concerned about this because there is no transparency. There's new legislation, and this new legislation can come into effect without being passed by Parliament. This is scary. The Australian Justice Minister Michael Keenan, he announced last month that the government would be spending about $13.3 million to develop a database, the National Facial Biometric Matching Capability, which would store still images that the law enforcement officers could use to track terrorists. And what people are very worried about is, how do we know they're not collecting all photos? Well, you don't. And you know, this is exactly what they're going to be doing. And Patrick Gray, a cybersecurity analyst, said this whole thing is creepy. This whole other league of invasive creepiness, and there's no discussion around this. It's really, really weird, and it makes no sense, because this database will contain 100 million photos, or around 4 photos for every Australian. So we see every country right now, most of them, are setting up these massive databases to keep an eye on everybody. This is what's happening right now. This is to keep control of the people. This is what they're doing. Now, out in Cuba, we understand the president was out there saying that sanctions don't work. We've been using sanctions for 50 years. But then he turns around and sanctions Russia, sanctions China, North Korea, Syria, Iran. You name it, they're being sanctioned. But it didn't work for Cuba, so we're going to maybe remove the sanctions. Or maybe not. We don't know yet. We see there's a resolution that will lift the U.S. blockade on Cuba. And Russia will vote for the Cuba proposed draft resolution demanding that the U.S. economic embargo against it be lifted. And the draft will be put to the vote on October 27th. But the United States is expected to oppose the motion. So they're going to go against it, and Russia wants the embargoes removed. Now, why is this? Well, the only reason the United States went back into Cuba is because Russia was opening their base again there. They're becoming very friendly with Cuba once again. This is a strategic location very close to the United States, and they needed access. This is why this is happening. We can see where this is headed. I mean, we've been following the military assets being moved all around the globe, troops being built up, and we see where all of this is headed at this point. Where are we headed? War. That's where we're headed. Now, there are new satellite image photos that reveal that the U.S. has secret drone bases in Djibouti. Department documents show that the Pentagon has turned an airfield into a hive of high-tech military equipment. The airport is isolated airstrip located about 6 miles to the southwest of Djibouti. I should say Djibouti City, which is the capital of the country. The picture reveals what seems to be a collection of clamshell hangars, satellite dishes, and unmanned planes that the U.S. has deployed there as part of its secret expansion plan. Now, I have this photo on the X22Report.com site, so if you'd like to come take a look at it, you can take a look at it, and you can see that, yes, there are drones on the base. Now, the U.S. is telling Iraq right now that if you work with Russia against the Islamic State, Iraq is now our enemy. So this just goes to prove that the United States was never battling the Islamic State, because we know it's their proxy army to get Assad. And the U.S. is giving Iraq an ultimatum. And Iraq, as we know, has already asked Russia, in writing, to come into their country and help with the problem. And the problem is, the United States government central bankers, they're not hitting their targets. They fly the missions, but they're not bombing their troops. their proxy army troops in Iraq because they need them to go into Syria. Instead, they're flying the missions and dropping supplies for them. And of course, the corporate media is telling a completely different story, but why would they tell the truth? They're not going to. Now, Kuwait is buying a bunch of weapons because they say they have to protect themselves against the Islamic State, which we know the Islamic State. It's funny how they're not going to Kuwait. They're not going to Egypt. They're not going to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel. They're only in Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, sometimes, Syria, all the places they need to get back into, and all the places they need to get into. But everywhere else, they don't want to go. It's amazing. Qatar. They have not ruled out military intervention into Syria. Now, wait a minute. What did Syria do to Qatar? Absolutely nothing. Did Syria invade Qatar? No. So why would Qatar go into Syria? They've never been attacked. Well, Saudi Arabia had never been attacked by Yemen, but they were able to go in there and start bombing and nobody questions it. So what's happening here is all of these countries are just invading other countries without reason. The United States, the coalition forces, went into a sovereign country, Syria, they weren't asked, and started bombing inside the country, destroying their infrastructure, killing innocent civilians. Russia, on the other hand, was asked to come into the country to help out against the terrorist problems. Now, Syria is saying, listen, if Qatar decides to come into Syria, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a harsh response from Syria. So we can see what's happening right now. All of these countries are banding together and going to make a push to try to get Assad out. In the meantime, we have Russia inside Syria, providing air cover for the Syrian army. The Syrian army has managed to take more ground from the U.S. Proxy army in the northern part of Syria, near Aleppo. They've captured 5 villages in their latest advance, and the Islamic State is being pushed back. And of course, the United States government central bankers are pushing more propaganda out there. Just like the United States hit a hospital in Afghanistan, they put out the propaganda, and this is coming from the Syrian Observation for Human Rights, which is, that guy in his bedroom in the UK reporting on what's going on in Syria. And he's saying that Russia hit a hospital in Syria, and 13 people, including medical staff, were killed. Now, what's very interesting about this is that when they were interviewing the people in Syria at the hospital, they said, yes, there was an airstrike. Who did the airstrike? They never said it was Russia. They had no clue who actually did the airstrike. And Russia is saying, it wasn't us. We did not hit the hospital whatsoever. And if you have proof, please show it to us. Now, most likely, we know the United States government and the coalition forces are in there destroying infrastructure. I mean, they took out a power plant. They've already hit a hospital in Afghanistan. Most likely, it was the United States and the coalition forces, because we know they just hit an oil refinery because they said the Islamic State was there and they were going to cut off their revenue. So they destroyed another piece of infrastructure in Syria. This is what the United States has been doing. And guess what? The Islamic State was nowhere to be found. Nothing in the area whatsoever. Putin is out there saying there's no need to distinguish between moderate and other terrorists. What's the difference? A terrorist is a terrorist. He's absolutely right. Why are they using the word moderate? Well, when the news came out, and of course not from the corporate media, from the alternative media, when everyone was out there saying, well, the United States is providing weapons to Al-Qaeda, the story went viral. The corporate media had to respond. The government had to respond to it. And they said, no. We're not supplying weapons to Al-Qaeda. We're supplying weapons to the moderate terrorists, not the Al-Qaeda terrorists. Because you have to remember how they use Al-Qaeda. They use Al-Qaeda, which is a CIA creation, to go into countries to overthrow the government. In countries they've already taken over and they placed a puppet government in power, the everyday person who wants their country back, they're called Al-Qaeda because there's legislation that allows drones to be used on Al-Qaeda. And this is the only way the U.S. government was able to fight back the people of that country from taking back their country. So on one hand, it's the people that's called Al-Qaeda. They're the terrorists. And then on the other hand, they actually have the Al-Qaeda that the CIA created, that where they're trying to remove the government in a certain country. For example, in Ukraine, as soon as those people in the southeastern region, as soon as they didn't agree with the new puppet government, what were they called? Terrorists. They couldn't use Al-Qaeda because it didn't make sense. Now, the Islamic State is redeploying reinforcement from Iraq to Syria. So what's happening right now is they're bringing in the troops from Iraq and they're moving into Syria to fight against Russia. Now, this is the proxy army for the United States. They've been dropping off weapons, and now they're all funneling out of Iraq and into Syria. And Saudi Arabia is still out there saying that the only way to stop the Islamic State in Syria is to remove Assad, and then the Islamic State will just disappear. I mean, does it even make sense to anyone? No, it doesn't. It makes no sense whatsoever. And what's very interesting, they keep saying Assad is hurting his own people. And an RT crew went around and started interviewing people inside of Syria. And these people are rebuilding, and they said, is it Assad that you're more afraid of, or is it the proxy army from the United States? And each one of them pointed towards the proxy army of the United States, saying they are the scariest. They hurt our people. They behead our people. They use chemical weapons on our people. They didn't mention Assad. Very interesting. Now, here in the United States, the FBI is continually out there telling us how they're stopping these terrorist groups. And what's very interesting is a Human Rights Watch group says the FBI, they may have created terrorists out of law-abiding citizens. What? This is what we've been talking about all along. They're saying in many cases, the FBI can encourage young men who may be online to actually grow into a full-blown type of terrorist. They set traps, they said. And many young men who talk big end up falling into these traps. Now they're saying most of these people are losers. They might be mentally unstable. They might be on medication. And more often than not, these allegedly radicalized Americans are just used with low self-esteem, who are online and finding a reason to exist. Almost like the trolls on YouTube who always come out and say, oh, I don't like this report, or I don't like what he's saying, or this is all BS, or, whatever they want to put out there. The only difference is they're getting paid. But they're the same people. I mean, take, for example, Joshua Goldberg, a 20-year-old Jewish man living with his parents in Florida, who had invented a second life on the internet where he presented himself as living in Australia and flooded social networks with pro-jihad messages. Now, he was arrested. He didn't do anything. He was just posting. And guess what was happening? The FBI was goading him each time. The same thing in Virginia. Teenager Ali Amin was sentenced to 11 years in prison for using social media to support the Islamic State. The FBI went on there once again, pushing, prodding, building up their self-esteem. Yes, you're doing the right thing. Keep doing it. But they really didn't do anything. They didn't stop anyone. This isn't the Islamic State. These are all young people who can't find jobs. Some of them are mentally disturbed, are showing off on the internet, pretending they're somebody else, and it's all fake. Critics say the Federal Bureau of Investigation, growing army of undercover agents tasked with hunting down terrorist recruits on U.S. soil, sometimes unduly pressures the young, impressionable people to plan and move forward with the acts they might otherwise not have conceived of on their own. There's an organization responsible for more terrorism plots in the United States than Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS combined. You know what they go by? Their name is the FBI. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.